everybody, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Hannah and I make videos about New York City and my life living here. And I am honestly a bit nervous about today's video because this is a topic that people tend to get heated about, and that is New York City safe? I usually try to keep this channel very upbeat and positive, and I realize that this is a heavier topic, but it's one that I've been asked about countless times, both on the internet and in my personal life, so I figured it's about time to cover it. There's been a lot in the media recently about New York City crime rates being up, particularly since the beginning of the pandemic. Back in March 2020, eyes were laser focused on New York City since it was the first major COVID hotspot in the US, and since then the city has been consistently making the news with some rather scary headlines. Today I'm going to dive right into this topic with some statistics and do my best to stay as unbiased as possible, and then later on in the video I will give you my thoughts and opinions just as a person who lives here. All of my sources are going to be linked in the video description if you would like to do some research on your own. Also, please go ahead and give this video a like if you don't mind. Thank you. Let's start by taking a look at the data collected by the NYPD on the 7 major felony offenses ranging from the year 2000 to 2021. As you can see at first glance, crime overall has been steadily decreasing since 2000, with minor increases from 2011 to 13, and then from 2014 through 2020, crime continued to decrease again with another spike in 2021, which is what we're here to talk about. As you can see, we do in fact have a bit of a crime increase, but even so, that puts what we saw in 2021 more on par with what we saw in 2015 or 16. We're still seeing significantly less crime now than in the year 2000, which wasn't even regarded as a particularly high crime era in New York City. It's also worth noting that the population in New York City is currently 8.8 million. And although that number, 102,000 plus major federal offenses, looks like a really large number, it's not so much when you look at the percentages. If we round down to 8.8 million even and do the math, you have a 1.17% chance of becoming a victim of one of these 7 major felonies in New York City, and a 0.01% chance of becoming a murder victim. Many of the headlines that I've seen recently compare New York City to what it was back in the 1970s, and this appears, based on the numbers, to be extremely exaggerated. To make the numbers a little more digestible, I'm going to take a look at the murder stats specifically. In 2021, there were 488 murders in New York City. You can see on this chart here that the murder rate in the 1970s was more than 3 times that from 1971 through 1979. And that's with a population of around 1 million less people as well. It is important to realize that not only has there been an increase in crime in New York City, but an increase nationwide, from a study conducted by the Council of Criminal Justice. Drawing on crime data from a sampling of 22 cities, the study found that the number of murders in 2021 was 5% higher than counts recorded in 2020, representing 218 additional murders in those cities, and 44% greater than in 2019, representing 1,298 additional lives lost. 16 of the 22 cities reported a rise in homicide last year, ranging from increases of 108% in St. Petersburg to less than 1% in Memphis and Baltimore, while 6, including Seattle and Omaha, saw a decline. Also, I do realize that I'm specifically focusing on murder here, and there are in fact other crimes. That's just because I'm trying to make the numbers a little more digestible, and if I provided stats on every kind of crime, this video would literally be several hours long. So I'm going to provide a link in the description with a map of the city where you can research the crime rate of specific crimes in different parts of New York City if you wish to do so. Now let's take a look at this article from Money Geek, which I've deemed credible based on the sources that they cite at the bottom of the article. I checked them myself, and you can as well. They're using data collected by the FBI and the Gun Violence Archive. Their article explores what the safest and most dangerous cities in the U.S. are based on the crime cost per capita. They ranked 297 cities with populations of 100,000 or more people from most to least safe, and you might be a little surprised by the results. There's an ongoing stereotype that larger cities are more dangerous. And while none of the larger cities on this list with populations of 300,000 or more people made the overall safest list, fewer than half of the least safe cities in the US are large cities. Here you can see a list of the 15 safest large cities, which again means over 300,000 people, and you'll see here that New York is ranked number 11 on this list. Here's the list of cities that ranked the most dangerous. Let's take a look at the murder stats in St. Louis, which takes the top of the list here. There were 198 murders in St. Louis in 2021, which is actually down, so that's fantastic. But the estimated population of St. Louis in 2021 was around 294,900 people, making the chances of becoming a murder victim in St. Louis 0.07% versus the 0.01% in New York City. Okay, so those are the stats, and I really did my best up until this point to keep everything factual and data driven, but now I'm going to speak a little more candidly on my feelings about the issue based both on the numbers, but also just as a person who lives here and experiences the city on a daily basis. I do want to make it clear that I can only speak to my personal experience. There has been a major increase in hate crimes, particularly against Asian individuals, both in New York City as well as nationwide, since the beginning of the pandemic. These crimes are absolutely atrocious and disgusting, and I want to make sure that I'm not just glossing over them. That being said, as a white person, this is not something that I can speak on when speaking about how personally safe I feel. If this is something that you have experience with and can speak on, I do invite you to please share your experience in the comments if you feel comfortable. I'm also going to share a link in the description to stopaapihate.org, where you can donate, report any hate crimes that you witness, and just overall get involved in their organization. Do I feel scared when I am out and about in the city? No, I don't. I never have, not now or prior to the pandemic. I live in downtown Brooklyn, and I spend most of my time in parts of Brooklyn as well as downtown and midtown, sometimes uptown too, in Manhattan. I want to share that information because I do think that where you're spending your time can make a difference as well. In New York and in all cities, there are areas that are generally safer than others. I would be willing to bet that the reason that people are reporting feeling more unsafe in places like Midtown Manhattan is just due to a sheer decrease in numbers in those areas. Midtown, for example, is primarily office space, and with so many people working from home now, there are just less people out there regularly. Midtown is also the biggest tourist destination in New York City. That's where Times Square is, Rockefeller Center, Broadway, all of these major tourist attractions. And so with less people visiting the city, that also contributes to a decrease in numbers. This is resulting in more visible homelessness and mental illness out on the streets in these areas. That being said, do I think that if you're a tourist, you shouldn't come here because it's unsafe? No, I don't. Although these areas are less crowded, they're by no means desolate right now. They were at the very beginning of the pandemic, but tourism is definitely coming back. All of this being said, just use your common street smarts. Be aware of your surroundings. Don't flash your valuables. Don't walk around plastered at 4 o'clock in the morning with earbuds in, and you're likely to be just fine. It is possible to be aware and smart without living in fear. I do also want to talk about the topic of crime in the subway, as I know that this has been pretty heavily publicized. Some of you may have seen recent safety plans that are being put into effect soon, but if you haven't, I will put links to articles about that in the description. I think that the idea of higher crime in the subway is something that is really getting to people a lot more than other types of crime, because the subway is so heavily used. That's how we get around here. That's how we get to work. There are people who take the subway multiple times a day. And so the crimes that are happening down there are ones that we can see ourselves in that position. These recent incidents of people being pushed in front of the oncoming train seems to be particularly getting to people because it's just so horrifying and seemingly random, and we all stand on the platform and wait on the train, and it's something that we can see ourselves ending up in that position, and it's really scary. Have I felt personally in danger on the subway recently? No, I haven't, but I do feel like the general vibe down there is just a little bit different. Everybody seems just a little more agitated and on edge. This isn't something that is preventing me from taking the subway by any means, but recently I have definitely been more cautious about standing in the center of the platform, or standing with my back up against a column, or sitting if there's a seat available while waiting on the train, which is probably something that I should have been doing all the time anyway. This issue, like many others, is of course something that needs to be addressed and fixed. But we also just have to keep perspective and realize that millions of people take the subway every single day without incident. I also want to talk about what I think makes this topic such a hot button issue. When we discuss crime in New York City, you get two very loud voices. You get a group of people who immediately jump to the defense and get almost angry that someone would imply that perhaps New York City is not safe. And then you get the second group of people who are just totally convinced that if you so much step foot on New York City's soil, you will be a victim of a crime. I think that the first group of people is, for the most part, coming from a place of love for their city. They love New York City, they love living here, and they want to defend it. I think that the second group are coming from a place of fear and misinformation. Of course you're going to be afraid when you're not from here personally, and all you're hearing about are heinous and awful events that are taking place here. You know, that is what the national news is reporting on. No one is reporting about the other 8 million plus people who have gone about their day happily without incident. That is why I think it's so important to do your own research that is based on statistics, both here and everywhere. For example, that murder rate of 0.07% in St. Louis that we discussed earlier is still very low. I've never actually been to St. Louis, but I've been to several other cities on that list of most dangerous ones. Charleston, Baltimore, Dayton, and I've had lovely experiences in all of these places. Crime can happen absolutely anywhere, and it is terrible, but we can't stop living our lives or exist in a constant state of fear because of it. New York is also on everybody's radar all the time because it is the largest city in the country and a major international hub. Just yesterday, when I was on the phone with my mom in Grundy, Virginia, the news that she had on in the background was playing a report of an incident that happened here in New York. As tragic as these events are, similar things are happening in smaller cities all over the place. It's just not making the national news. Something I really do take issue with is the way that the news media uses headlines that are just straight up fear-mongering. The headlines that I showed back in the beginning of this video about how New York is going back to what it was in the 70s, for example, are just not true. But they're using these titles that elicit an emotional response because that's what gets views and clicks online. Even just the other day, here, locally, I saw a broadcast from the Adams administration about the increase in crime. These are the same numbers that I showed you on the report from the NYPD at the beginning of this video. The y-axis on this bar graph starts at 92,000 rather than 0, which makes this increase look much more dramatic than it is. Here's another bar graph showing the exact same information, but the y-axis starts on 0. Although this is the same information, this version is much less shocking to look at. Is the crime rate in New York City up? Yes. Is the crime rate up nationwide? Yes. Is this something that we and our government officials should work to fix? Of course. Is this something that we should be overly concerned about and lock ourselves in our homes over? I don't think so. I truly hope that if you stumbled across this video because you're planning a trip here and want to know if it's safe, or you already live here and have been nervous due to what you've been seeing on the news, or if you have a family member here and you're concerned for them, that this video eased your mind at least a little bit. In my time living in New York City, I've witnessed some questionable incidents, sure, as I'm sure anyone else who lives here or in any other major city probably has as well. But what I see more frequently than that is a beautiful, vibrant, diverse community of people living in a city with more opportunity and resources than you could ever even imagine available right at the tips of our fingers. I would love to hear all of your thoughts on this in the comments, and I know that on the internet I have very little control over the response that I'm about to get, but I'm gonna try anyway and ask you to please just be polite and kind, both towards me and toward anyone that you might find yourself interacting with. Again, all of my sources are linked in the description if you would like to do further research yourself. Please go ahead and give this video a like if you don't mind. It really does help me out with the YouTube algorithm and all of that. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for new videos every single Saturday, most of which are considerably more upbeat than this one. Next week, we finally have an apartment tour coming up, which I know are a lot of your favorite types of videos. Mine too. I'm very excited for that, so turn on those bell notifications to be notified when it goes up. What else is there? Oh, click here or here to watch more in the meantime, and I will see you next week.